Good evening. I'm delighted to be here. It's a real privilege to be here tonight. Thank the University, I thank CCN, and I thank Xavier for making this happen. This is a very special man. I hope you treasure him. He has 1 foot in Scotland and 1 foot in Catalonia, and he can do this country a lot of good because he's done my country a lot of good. I think I'd like you to identify the missing word here. The issue here is why small means more in the wealth of independent nations, because I think we've got a proven track record that independent nations do better. Small independent nations do particularly well. If you see your papers today, you'll see the growth of small countries much better than the large countries. They're more resilient, and they create higher levels of social cohesion and national purpose. They make us proud to be of our nationality. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give you a little bit of my personal philosophy, because I came late to politics, and coming late to politics at the age of 56 is quite scary. You need a philosophy. I'm going to make the case for small, autonomous, independent countries. And I say I'll make the case, but the case is enormous. And if we were to spend the night asking your ideas, we would create a huge bill of materials as to why it is a great idea. I'm going to give you a little bit of Scottish history to tell you the journey that we've been on down the centuries. I will tell you about how we made our economic case back in the period 2000 to 2007, where instead of giving a press conference, we went to each and every one of the newspaper titles and talked to them about the economic case. We went to make sure that we were talking to the chairman, the chief executive, the editor, the political editor, the economic editor, the business editor, and of course that process made the presentation better with every successive presentation we gave. I'll give you some indication about who we are, the SNP, the Scottish National Party as people. I will talk about the progress we've made since 1999, which is great progress. I will talk about national philosophies and how we can drive ourselves forward and learn from each other in that process. I'll talk about what our opponents, our unionist opponents in Scotland are trying to do to undermine our case, and show you the fallacy that's behind that, and show you why it is that all they can do is produce a case against independence. They cannot produce a case for continuing the union. 40 years ago in Scotland, people would say the only case for independence is an emotional one. We can now say the only case for the union is an emotional one. And I will also talk about how we intend to build our case for the referendum that we will have round about 2015, when we have further produced the case. But I wanted to, in a personal philosophy, to say that, you know, this is a two-way street. I'm learning lots from Catalonia. You will learn something from me. But today is an experience where I'm broadcasting to you. But make no mistake, I'm going back with lots of ideas and lots of successes and lots of progress here that will help us inform what we are driving forward. The other element of my personal philosophy is a Scottish poem that essentially says we need to have an open mind. This says, you know, I always live where the extremes meet. It's the only place I know to dodge the great conceit of being right that damns the vast majority of men. The more we're open-minded about something as important as the future of our country, the more we will get the best possible result. And I think anybody that believes that will encourage and open the debate and make the debate all the richer. Having said that, I know I'm adamantly right that Scotland independent will do so much better. I am absolutely convinced that that is the case. That is the fast and winning operation. That's going to be the winning horse. The other one that if we stay within the union, we will essentially be plodding along at a very slow rate. We will go nowhere. And the issue here is this personal philosophy. We have persuaded the Scottish business community because we're telling them a simple truth. If Scotland continues to be living on a housekeeping allowance from London, then we will get very, very poor results. If all your job is to spend the budget, you will get poor results. You need the feedback loop of building the economy, of strengthening the national balance sheet, of improving the national financial position, of building the notional share value of Scotland. That would be the way to develop things forward. And I think in terms of making the case for more small, autonomous, independent countries, we have to recognize that there is a trend at work. There's a gentleman in America called Alberto Alcina, who's written a very important book called The Size of Nations. And he records that the number of countries on the planet in 1945 was 74 countries. It's now 196. There is a trend, a happy trend at work here. And the reasons I'm not going to linger on, but the reasons are obvious reasons: a sense of purpose, a sense of vision, a sense of social cohesion, the ability to align policy with the objectives that you want to achieve, access to markets, etc. As for history, Scotland's history is a long one. I think Scotland and Catalonia are two of the most ancient nations in Europe. That means the world. And essentially we go back to 1843 when we had the first, 843 when we had the first King of Scotland. Moving on, we were invaded in 1290 by Edward I. That's the time of Braveheart. I think we should have a moment silent for Mel Gibson. And that's when we fought our major wars of independence. Robert the Bruce to essentially resurrect Scotland's independence. Then in 1603, Elizabeth I died, and the next successor was James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. And that started the rot, because once the king was down there, the centre of attention was down there, and 104 years later, there was a union of the parliaments, at a time where the people of Scotland did not have the vote, at a time where very small numbers of people had the vote, at a time where votes were bought, because Scotland had a disaster in the Darien scheme in Panama just shortly before that it essentially bankrupted the country, so they were vulnerable at that time. 1979, we had a referendum to see about Scottish independence, but it was a rigged referendum where they insisted that 40% of the electorate voted in favour. And with people not turning out, etc., that was a difficult hurdle to get over. Then in 1997, we had a referendum on Scottish independence with a very positive result for referendum and for taxpayers. And then the Parliament started in 1999, and the lady who opened the Parliament, Winnie Ewing, said something rather wonderful. She said, the Scottish Parliament adjourned the 23rd day of March 1707 is now reconvened. And we then have the prospect of a referendum in 2016-2000. Okay, let me tell you the economic case that we were making that's given us the foothold, that's developed forward our position in the Parliament. We were making an economic case that said, Scotland under previous administrations had no top level objectives, no powers to tax, no powers to borrow or to save. It had essentially a situation that therefore meant that we had a relatively low rate of competitiveness. We had 40 years of low economic growth, way lower than the rest of the UK. We were watching the collapse of foreign direct inward investment into Scotland. As a result of that, we had government revenue stalling, we had the lowest life expectancy in the OECD, a real indicator that things were not right. And we had a genuine population decline, losing people out of the country, migrating to Australia, migrating to Canada, migrating to the rest of England, to London. And also, because of all of that, we had essentially high levels of economic inactivity, lots of people not in work. We had essentially an income gap opening between rich and poor, and an income gap opening between incomes in Scotland and incomes in the rest of Europe. And we also had essentially a very low business birth rate. If you're losing head offices, if there's no spend in research and development, you have a low business birth rate. So it was not a healthy situation. And it was understanding and reflecting on that allowed us to make the case, because what we were saying was these are bad outcomes, but also we are a fantastic nation of huge potential. We've got this amazing international brand. Michael Porter at Harvard identified in the year 2000 that there were 16 countries on the planet that meant something to 95% of the population of the world. And one of these was Scotland, because of maybe things like whiskey and golf and tartan, etc. But who cares? So we registered, we were there. And we have got a really good international reputation. Michael Porter also discovered our reputation was no longer for inventiveness, which hurt us a lot. Apparently that died with Lord Kelvin in 1900. But we are famous for integrity and reliability. You know, we like that. We think that's pretty good in a knowledge economy. We've got strong industrial sectors in life sciences and financial services, in oil and gas and transport and food and drink and tourism, etc. Like you, we've got great people, talented, well-educated people. We've got pretty much a pristine environment. We've got enormous natural resources, oil and gas, the new renewable sector, 25% of Europe's offshore wind, 25% of Europe's tidal energy, 10% of Europe's wave energy, and we are not an overheated economy. We are an economy that has got lots of scope for further growth. But the reality, looking at the period 1980 to 2005, was that we were growing at a perpetually low rate compared to the United Kingdom. So we were able to say there is no level playing field here. If the growth is so much higher in the rest of the UK, and probably the London number is closer to the Norwegian number, then we need to have a better approach and a levelling of the playing field. And essentially the proposition is, higher growth would mean a higher tax take and reduced dependency, more people in the workplace, more social cohesion, less pressure on the health service, less pressure on the police service, less pressure on the education service, with youngsters coming to school well-fed and well-educated. And in simple terms, I was always reckoning that we were kind of hard-wired behind the UK. We had a model that made it impossible for us to close. We were enjoying mediocre performance. And we had policies at a UK level that were designed to optimise the UK, not to optimise Scotland. And what worried us by 2006, with the accession states coming in, that we would fall further and further behind, and that was essentially because we didn't have the economic powers to properly compete. And the worry was that we would fall further and further behind because we'd experienced other countries overtaking us all of my lifetime, and I was born in 1947. So these issues forced us to say, right, there's two things. You can wring your hands and cry about it, etc. What are you going to do about it? And we took the idea that we had to have a new approach. And that new approach, we learned on great thinkers of the past, a guy called W. Edward Deming, who turned around the Japanese economy in the 1950s. His final book was called The New Economics for Industry, Government and Education. Basic proposition that says if you can galvanise manufacturing industry, if you can transform and make them adaptable, you can surely do the same for government, for the health service, for the justice service, for your economy. And we leaned particularly heavily on a guy called Goldratt. And Goldratt has developed a thing called the theory of constraints. And he talks about a way to move things forward by getting people together, understanding what the problems are, getting people to tell us what the problems and inhibitors are, then listing each of these on separate pieces of paper and mapping them on the table until we get a cause and effect diagram, till we identify the core problem, and having identified that core problem, have the discipline to fix the core problem and not go and fix other problems that we'd like to fix. Solve that core problem first, and then come back to revisit the system to fix the next core problem. So we spent a number of years talking to the press, talking to the boardrooms of Scotland, essentially proving that the core problem was the limited powers that we had in Scotland, that meant that we had a branch economy, that meant that we had to take the same tax rate as central London and apply it to the very north of Scotland, that saw and was the cause of the collapse of foreign direct inward investment, that made it impossible for us to overcome the gravitational pull of London.